and welcome back to the podcast. We are here with Paul G. McManus, and he's the founder of More Clients, More Fun LLC, and he's also the host of the $1 Million Show, or the $1 Million Producer Show podcast. And we're going to be talking about how you personally, we're speaking directly to you, can become an author, why you should write short books, and about Paul's amazing book, The Short Book Formula. So, Paul, super glad to be talking to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And I'm glad to have you here. And, you are preaching to the choir as far as like this whole idea of having like a short little book, like a business card kind of book when it's super big and thick. I mean, who's even going to read that? So I feel like we are on the same team to convince our audience right now to have short books. And even more importantly, they need to learn and get help from you personally to get their short book created. So can you tell us all about what you're about and your uniqueness and what your passion is these days?
Yeah, definitely. So I've been running my company, More Clients, More Fun, for the past 8 years now. And it started out and continues to be really heavily focused on using LinkedIn as a platform to help mostly financial professionals build their brand, drive more leads, and create more qualified appointments. During that time, I discovered, through trial and error, what worked, what didn't work, as we all do, right? And one of the biggest challenges I discovered for my clients was that we became very quickly pretty adept at helping them schedule appointments with potential clients, but the close rate was poor, to say the least. And that's something that's really frustrating because my initial conception was if I could just get them the lead, if I could just get them the appointment, then these are experienced sales professionals. They're going to close this and we're all going to win, right? And I think the dynamic is that, and there's my dog behind me. I think the dynamic is that for many people, especially before the pandemic, selling, through Zoom, building relationships with strangers that they didn't meet in person, was just a completely different world for them. I think, since the pandemic, that's become increasingly more common. But before the pandemic, I mean, even though I was teaching them LinkedIn, one of the biggest insights they had is, wow, this Zoom platform is pretty cool. I don't have to go and actually meet with people in person. So that made me a student of authority marketing. And the idea behind authority marketing is how can you transform yourself from being seen as a salesperson to being seen more as a trusted authority, a teacher, an expert. How can you elevate your status in such a way that your prospects literally would pay for your marketing or your content? And by the time they get a chance to speak with you, they're already persuaded that you're the person to help them. And so along those lines, in 2018, I want to say, I met a gentleman. I won't use his full name, but his name was Matt. And he was a very successful financial professional. And he was an author, published a book, and he used that as a system to build his business, recruit other advisors, etc. And we started a partner. And so we built a whole LinkedIn program based off of his book that we did. And the results, the consistency of results that I saw for my clients was noticeable, right? So we took LinkedIn, which is a communications platform. We took the idea of authority marketing, or a book based off of his book, and we put people into the system. We created the system, and it was noticeably more effective for the reasons that authorship can be. But of course, there were some pitfalls, right? So, it was an improvement, but it wasn't perfect. So, passing out, distributing someone else's book, while helpful, has its limitations. And those limitations are, of course, A, if I didn't write the book, the authority does not necessarily represent me. I'm just promoting someone else's book. 2, if the book is too long, chances are the person's going to say, great, thank you for the book. I appreciate it. They're going to take a big look at it. It's going to go on their bookshelf. They're not going to throw it away, but they're not going to read it. And so through trial and error and just understanding the psychology and the dynamics of all that was going on here, I started studying this and I wrote my own first book back in 2019. Since then, I've written 3 short books, and I've helped Over just in the past year, I've helped over 50 financial professionals become authors. And there's some very core strategies or principles that we use as part of our book writing process. And if you want to, I mean, I can dive into it, or do you want to ask me anything, or you tell me what's best?
No, I mean, you're on a roll, so don't let me get in your way. Let's dive into what the strategy is all about.
Yeah, so 9 principles of the short book formula. And of course, I wrote the book, The Short Book Formula, which can either be bought on my web or can be purchased on my website or on Amazon, either one. And that's but there's 9 key principles to it. So principle number 1, and this is not going to surprise you, but it's keep it short, right? Go figure. And I recommend roughly 10,000 to 12,000 words. When you format it the way that we do, that creates a roughly 100-page book. And it's key to have a book that when you publish it and print it, such as this one, the key is that you want to have it 80 pages or more. And the reason for that is that you need at least 80 pages to get a spine. If it's less than 80 pages, it looks a little bit more like a pamphlet. But 80 pages or more, you get an actual book. And so part of that word count is that it's designed to convey your message through a book, so you're educating your ideal prospect, but it's also designed to be read in an hour or less. You want something that you can use as both a marketing tool and a sales tool, and you can reasonably expect that a prospect will read or be willing to read, and they can get through it in an hour or less. If you go beyond that, either you're going to get a lot of resistance, the book's not going to do what it's meant to do, and rightfully so. So that's principle number 1. Principle number 2 is keep it focused. Oftentimes, when you talk to people, and since you do Done For You podcasting, you'll, I'm sure, relate to this. But people, it's like I have so many ideas. I can talk about 20 different things, and okay, great. But how are you going to attract an audience around that? It's too wide. It's too dispersed, and so you want to keep it focused, ideally on one specific problem for one specific audience that you can help them solve through your book. And the magic of the short book formula is that, writing your first book is a big deal, and it's an accomplishment, and et cetera. But once you get your first book, you kind of get the bug for, you're like, hey, I wrote the one book and I can write this other book on this other narrowly construed topic. And then potentially over time, you write multiple books. I mean, myself, for example, I've written 3 books now, and I'm already contemplating my 4th one. So the book itself should have a very specific audience in mind, and the topic and the problem you're trying to solve should be fairly narrowly construed. The third is to use stories. So this is nonfiction, but if it's too much dry technical data, even if it's 100 pages, people are going to get bored. They're going to get lost. They're not going to finish it. And so, it's no secret that stories are compel, are interesting. They hold people's attention better. And I find that just using client stories is really the best way to do it, because then when you're talking to clients, you're saying, yeah, like my client, if you read my book, it's like my client in chapter 3, how he did this. And this becomes a big part of your sales conversation. You're constantly referring back to the book. Now, there are some questions or questions that come up. For example, I said, well, what if my clients don't want me to use their information? I'm a financial advisor, and this is personal data. So that's a fair question. So there's a couple different ways to handle that. One, you can ask them, say, hey, I'd like to feature in my book. I just helped a guy write a book called The ESG Data Revolution. And one of the suggestions I had for him was to actually engage his best clients as part of the writing process so that he could actually feature them as mini case studies in the book. And everybody's like, sure, absolutely. We want to be part of this project. And that helped fuel and build some further synergies in the relationship. Now, of course, if someone doesn't give you that permission, you can simply change the name, use the same fact set, change the name. Additionally, you can use a composite, right? So sometimes, you deal with 100 different clients, and you get this one story pretty consistent, or you get stories that come up consistently in patterns. And so, with the process of writing, you can be creative and just create essentially a character, and you can let your reader know, it's like, hey, this is a character based on my client's experiences, but then tell the story. But you want to use client examples and tell the story. Should I continue, or any questions?
I mean, just no questions, just like sort of absorbing, digesting what you're saying. I love your thought process here because it's so easy to fall into that knowledge trap of saying like, well, I just want to pile in all these things. And then like you're saying, if you pile in too much, you're getting your reader bogged down. They won't finish. It'll be too long. And then if you think more about the story aspect, it's easier reading. And it's like more effective too, because it's like your readers guard is sort of let down and it's more fun to read. And then they can envision themselves as one of these clients that you're talking about, instead of you trying to like give them these facts and they have to translate it into their brain as far as like them using it in the future. They kind of become the character, sort of like if you read a book or watch a movie, it's like you're kind of living through that main character. And the bonus that you're saying here is that if you can involve your existing clients somehow, then that really deepens that relationship as well. So it's like everybody wins, right? Your existing clients win, you win because you have something that's more effective than these prospects that you're marketing to. They can better understand the message. And for all you know, they've done research, they've done Googling, they've watched YouTube, they might have read other books, but yours is the one that stands out because you actually have the story. So I love the groove that we're in right now as far as making your book fun, making it short, making it targeted, and then working in these client stories. So yes, please continue. And I'm loving where we're going with this conversation.
Cool. Yeah. And, for most of my clients and ideal prospects, I mean, typically they're, experienced sales professionals. And so they have a ton of stories. If anything, they typically have too many stories. And so part of the writing process that's interesting is that it's really transformational. I mean, and I take it that you wrote a book or you're an author?
A few, just like you. Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah. So, you start out with just some concepts, but once you start writing a book and you've gone through the process, it really helps you to clarify your ideas. It helps you polish your stories. And so it just makes you that much more effective when you're actually having conversations with people, because you tend to tell, the same, or, you have a handful of stories that you're telling. So either you can expand what you're telling about, you can just really polish them. And so they go in the book, they're part of your daily day-to-day conversation. What's most gratifying is that, you meet someone for the first time, you're on a call, you don't know them, but they're like, yeah, I read your book and I'm just really excited about what you talked about in chapter 7 about Jane and how she took the book to a networking event and, 10 people were, asking her for a copy and she scheduled 5 appointments. It's like, then that you've connected, right? When you're able to do that. And so that's really gratifying to hear when clients start telling you their experience in doing that. So principle number 4 of the 9 principles is essentially to write for people who believe what you believe. Trying to change minds, while admirable in some cases, is essentially a losing battle. And so people, there's this idea of polarity, is that you want to speak to your people, you want to and the more you speak to them and their values, being willing to take some risks to repel others that don't necessarily buy into that, the more magnetically you're going to attract the right people to you. So it's willing to be authentic, tell your story, be willing to polarize if appropriate. But, the idea of trying to change someone fundamentally, their opinion or approach, is just not the right way to do it. Next is make it multimedia. Now, this might sound strange for a book, but in today's world, a book can easily be a physical copy. I definitely recommend, publishing a physical copy because, once again, unlike a brochure, it becomes your business card, and unlike a brochure, it's something that people keep and don't throw away. But if you have a podcast, for example, part of the stories is that you can, using, the written word, you can talk about the story about clients. But if you already have, if you're a podcast host, for example, and you already have great client stories or, different stories that you can do, why not link to them, right? Take people on that customer journey from just reading the book into multimedia, such as videos, such as podcasts. We also do what's called a flip book as another version that we use, and all those things can be easily just, click, it immediately moves a person to the video content. So as people have different attention spans, or not different attention spans, people have a short attention span. So to really get their attention, they have to be really interested in the topic, which is why the book itself is crafted to be read in an hour or less. But once you do get someone's interest and you captivate them, they really do start exploring and they want to know more about you. They want to see further proof and evidence that what you're saying is legitimate. And so the more that you can demonstrate that, and once again, I like to use client, I sometimes invite clients on my podcast, interview them, they tell their stories, but strategically I'll link that throughout my book. And so making it multimedia is really a smart thing to do. Next, in terms of publishers, I don't recommend trying to go the traditional route and finding a publisher because, except for about 1% of people that might be the best fit for most people, it's just, going to be a waste of time. Likewise, there's some companies out there like Forbes Books, for example, that will charge you north of $100,000 to help you write your book. And they're going to help you, without, well, let's see, I don't necessarily want to say anything bad specifically about them, but, you don't have to make $100,000 investment, let's just say, to get a very compelling, well-written book done that essentially accomplishes the same thing. So we recommend just simply self-publishing, publishing to Amazon. There's different marketing strategies, but my go-to is that once you publish it to Amazon, you can literally publish it for as little as $3.50. They will print it on demand, meaning that you don't have to buy a bunch of books. You can literally buy a copy at a time. And for $3.50, if you have Prime, you can ship it as part of that for free. And so imagine, if you're sending out a brochure, if you're mailing anything, for $3.50, you can essentially mail your book, and that cost is negligible compared to most other marketing that's out there. Next principle is be clear about your intentions, right? So I help my clients, I guide them through the process where the book is meant to be educational. We want the reader to read it and get something out of it. But by the same token, we want to be clear that the goal of this is that if you like what you're reading, we want you to reach out and we want to, help you implement these ideas. And so a lot of people have this headspace where they're like, oh, I can't ask for anything, or conversely, they're too aggressive in their approach. But we simply put in the first part of the book that the reason I wrote this book is to, talk about this, this, and this. Additionally, I'm going to, if what you're hearing makes sense, I'm going to invite you to reach out to me. And then at the end of the book is really kind of a sales letter, encourage them to reach out to you. So, I don't support the idea just, write, and if the right, the story I like to use is that it's like the politician. Why didn't you vote for me? Well, you didn't ask me to vote for you. Right. So tell them why you're writing this book, be clear, make it of value, give them a good experience, but then ask for them to reach out, and you'll be amazed at how many people take you up on it. Two more, make it direct response. So throughout the book as appropriate, use links that go to, say, to your website that might have bonuses, might have, additional tip sheets, but you can add more content than just goes in the book, and then potentially, if it goes to a website, you can also get additional opt-ins as appropriate. And then the final one, and this is self-serving, but it's don't go it alone. It's not, actually, I take that back. I was joking about that. It's not just self-serving, but it's actually in the interest of the process. It's in the interest of the person writing the book that if they want to do this well, that they do need help, that they would benefit from help. And it's a discovery process that oftentimes you need fresh eyes looking at what you're doing. If anything, most people have this thing called imposter syndrome. It's like, I don't know what to talk about, or who am I to talk about this? And in most cases, that's completely incorrect. I once had a client, and I called her the penguin lady. She was literally one of 4 people in the world that the UN called when there was a problem with the penguins somewhere in the world. And she had imposter syndrome. She's like, who am I to, claim this authority? I'm like, who are you not to, right? And so just simply having fresh eyes, helping guide you through this process in a very, very clear process, or, really can help you create a book that you're proud of, that gets accomplished. And you can do all this in as little as 6 weeks. And so that's essentially the core service that we offer, which is to help people write, publish, and then market their book in as little as 6 weeks.
Amazing. We fit in all this great advice. And I mean, I have a flood of great ideas after hearing about your process. And so many things come to mind. One is that I'm sort of a programmer. I used to do a lot more of it, but there's a thing called the rubber duck method, where if you are stuck with programming, you're like, I can't fix this bug, I can't get this to work. You imagine a rubber duck in front of you, and you're just talking to the rubber duck saying like, well, I'm doing this and this isn't working. And just the process of explaining it to someone sort of reveals what the answer is. And so when you're saying things like, don't go it alone, that makes a lot of sense. And then like with the imposter syndrome, it seems like having a lot of these sort of client success stories overcomes that, because that way you don't even really have to talk yourself up. You're talking up your results and the people that you're helping. And just so much of what you've been teaching in this podcast episode so far, it seems very modern, right? Because like we were saying that the pandemic, people always look at like the bad stuff that came of it, but coming on the other side of it, so much changed. Like pre-pandemic, I don't know about you with your podcasting, but I didn't do video because the internet wasn't fast enough and Zoom wasn't simple enough, and maybe my camera wasn't good or theirs wasn't good. And now post-pandemic, everyone Zooms, everyone is used to video. So there's all these benefits that we have coming out of the pandemic. And even pre-pandemic, I wasn't a LinkedIn user at all. And now I use it multiple times a day. I get all kinds of sales conversations, all sorts of sales happening from LinkedIn. So what's good about a lot of your advice here is that it's timely, and that and you're saying at the beginning of our conversation that this whole idea of having this book is by having it part of your process, you have people sort of beating down your door, right? You don't have to be a salesperson and say, okay, well, let me have my selling points ready and my objections, and let me try to sort of mold them into what I want. Now that they've been sort of pre-educated and pre-excited about what you can do for them, then these appointments that you have are very pre-qualified. So it's almost a formality, right? As far as meeting and maybe having a quick conversation, but you don't have to do a lot of educating or convincing, because someone's using your process and your system and your short book that doesn't says all the right things. And so where do people go wrong in this process? Like we've said, that it's really tempting to try to go it alone, and there's you get stuck one little spot and you're just completely stranded on the side of the road, so they need your help. But as far as going through your system and your process, where do authors get stuck? Is it like narrowing down the stories or coming up with a hook? Like what's a common just snag that people should know about going in?
Yeah, great question. And I think from a technical standpoint, I mean, there's probably 5-10% of the people that are listening to this who probably already have the technical skills to do it. And so for a few people, it could be okay to go it alone. But for 80-90% of the people, first and foremost, just all the different technical aspects that go into creating a high quality product are probably not there, or there's too steep of a learning curve that doesn't make it very efficient. But to your other point, it's really, we all need this. I need this. You need this, is that we need fresh eyes. We need a second opinion, and we need someone to guide us through the process of getting the best out of this. So what most commonly happens, once again, is that people come and they have all of this knowledge, and they might end up offering a bunch of different products and services, and so they're just trying to put out too much information there, and the content just doesn't connect with the right people. So really it's just helping them narrow down their focus, and then helping them tell it in such a way that engages a reader and at a quality that they can be proud of. And so one of the things I tell my clients in terms of writing is that this is a collaborative process. Now, if you come with writing skills, fantastic. If you don't have writing skills, doesn't really matter. We're going to help you. The main thing that we want from our best clients is that they actually have some experience in the field doing what they do, so that they have these stories, they have these ideas, so that we can help draw that out of them and package it in such a way that is geared towards their best clients.
So yeah, like there's the saying, I think it's like Abraham Lincoln said, like, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have enough time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So people have like, and I imagine they might even have these stories and not realize how good they are because they don't have that kind of sounding board for you, but they might have like 50 stories, 50 ideas, and you might say, well, hey, let's get it down to like maybe like 5 or 6 stories, exactly. Because you could pile in all these things, but it's not about you as the author. It's about the person that you're trying to help. So you do have all these stories, and maybe those could be saved for like your blog or your podcast or your social media. But as far as just this book, just this this target, this goal you're trying to achieve, there's just out of all the things you could say, there's a handful of things that you could and should say in the right order in order to get to what that goal is. And imagine if someone hasn't written a book before, it's so overwhelming, right? About even where to begin. But then someone like you say, you know, I eat, breathe, and sleep books, and I can dive into your exact uniqueness and your exact skill and kind of narrow this down and figure it out. And so I guess when when you and I are talking about this whole idea of the story, we're saying that it kind of helps to work their imagination, and they can imagine themselves like, you know, being one of these clients. So if someone is listening to this podcast here, Paul, and they're imagining that they are one of your clients, what is sort of the approximate price point, time frame? What's the experience like when they're working with you on their short book?
Yeah, so we do it in roughly 6 weeks, and it's all done over Zoom. And so we guide people through the whole process. And once again, they don't have to be skilled writers. They, you know, if they've been doing what they've been doing for at least a couple of years, up to they've been doing this for decades and decades. Typically anywhere in that range is good. And we're just going to help them get really clear and focused about who the book is for and how to accomplish the goal of using it as the ultimate business card to attract their ideal clients. It's 6 1-hour Zoom sessions that we do, and the pricing is actually currently, could change, but it's currently 3 payments of $3,000. That's a total of $9,000. Now that, you know, for some people might, you know, I'll get one of 2 reactions. That's either, wow, that's so inexpensive, or the other will be like, wow, that's a lot of money. And both are fair. But when you compare it to companies such as the one I mentioned earlier, they'll charge you north of $100,000 to essentially accomplish the same thing. And so it's a tenth of that price, if not less. And then it's the opposite, which is, I would really just say, what's it costing you not to have a book, right? You know, how many clients, opportunities, prospects are you not attracting, not closing? And so to me, writing a book is just really a foundational piece of marketing collateral that can last years, if not longer, but it's really a both and strategy. So in other words, a book by itself, you know, if you do any type of networking or referrals and things like that, which most of us do, it just becomes the ultimate business card. But then when you know, if you're also advertising or spending money on marketing, whether it's in podcasting, whether it's in any kind of, you know, paid lead generation, it really helps to further enhance the return on investment there, because a podcast host and a podcast host who has a book, the person who has the book is going to be that more effective, because people are, you know, you're going to create exposure relationships to the podcast, but now people have a tangible takeaway that they can take back and go through your process. You know, if you're guesting on podcasts, same thing. It's like, you know, I'm sure you'll ask me, but it's, you know, it's like, if you've listened to this and you're interested, go to theshortbookformula.com where you'll get a copy of my book. So all of those strategies is that it's costing you, in my estimation, a lot of money if you don't have a book. And so $9,000 is, I think, a very, very small investment in building the business that you really dream about, which is being able to create and attract your ideal clients very, very consistently.
I agree completely that you need a book. And if someone was looking up, say, like a certified financial planner, for instance, and they're looking at 2 possibilities and they all look very identical on paper, but one has a book and one doesn't, then who are they going to choose? And there's also something that it took me so many years to wrap my head around this, Paul, is that idea about the levels of awareness, right? That someone might not even know about the problem that they have. And then maybe they know that, but they don't know about the solution, and know the solution, but they don't know about like your solution. And I used to just take that for granted. And I used to only deal with people that were almost at the finish line and just happened to find me and come to me. And it takes, especially if there's someone who's been at this for decades, it's so hard to simplify it and make it more beginner, newbie friendly for someone that just needs to get caught up to those levels of awareness in order to find you. And so this way, like you said, it can be that business card no one will throw away. That way, when you're getting on podcasts, both trying to get on the podcast itself, but then once you're on there and you say, well, now that I've dispensed all this information, what's the next step? Instead of like, oh, go to my website or check out my podcast, it's like, hey, this is a very easy transaction. Get my book. And so that way the call to action is clear. Excuse me. And even if someone is not quite ready to dive into the whole solution, they can order the book, comes in the mail, like, oh yeah, I remember this. And then, like you said, because it's just an hour or less worth of reading, when the timing is right, they can flip through it. I mean, even my desk, right? There's all kinds of books I have here, and some are read and some are half read. And so it's painful to throw that away. You feel like you're wasting trees or something, versus if someone sent like a little piece of paper or a business card, that goes in the trash instantly. But a book, it's like, it's painful to throw that away. So people need books, and they need your help to get the book figured out, because there's so many ways to go wrong, especially leaving it halfway done, which you go it alone, that's very likely, but you have a team helping you, and it's very unlikely. So if someone says, man, I've been so impressed with what Paul has to say, I might have to listen to this podcast 2 or 3 times just to get all these principles figured out. What's in the logical next step? How do they get your book, and how do they get on the train of this short book writing process?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for asking. So once again, my website, it's theshortbookformula.com. From there, you can get a complimentary ebook version of it. You can go to Amazon, enter it, get a physical copy sent to you. That's really the first step, because I'll tell you a secret about how I conduct my sales calls, and this is what I really want for the listeners and the people that do become my clients, is that, to your point earlier, there's this, most people are operating, I think, unfortunately, just on, okay, someone has a need and they get a referral and they come to you because they had a need. But there's this whole range of places where you should ideally be engaging people, so that you can raise awareness, you can educate them about the problem, and then you can offer the solution and be seen as the right choice. What a book can do is significantly speed up that process. So my own sales process, here it is, like in a minute or so, is that if someone schedules a 15-minute call with me on my calendar, I'm going to have a nice conversation with them. I'm going to ask them some thoughtful questions, but ultimately I'm going to qualify them and see if they're a good fit for me, and vice versa. I'm going to immediately determine, though, have they read my book or not? If they've read my book, I can extend that conversation out to about 30 minutes, because they're now qualified to have an educated conversation with me about, is this correct for them? And I tend to close those calls at about 80%, because they've read the book and they've reached out to me. Conversely, someone who has not read the book, maybe is listening to this, but is interested in talking to me, wants to schedule a call, I'll take the same call. It's 15 minutes. But if they haven't read the book and I determine that they don't know enough about what I do, I'll intentionally say, hey, let's do this. I'm going to send you a physical copy. And as I mentioned earlier, I can do this for $3.50 through Amazon. And I'll say, hey, let's schedule a call for a week from now. Can you read the book in between that? And of course, if they say yes, then we go ahead and schedule the call for a week from now. If they say no, it's like, okay, I'm not going to schedule the next call. But likewise, when they say yes, they read the book, they come to the next time. Once again, 80%, I close my my conversations, if you will. And so I share that only because that's what I want for you. And by you, I mean everyone listening to this. Gone are the days, or could be gone are the days, of these endless sales cycle, these presentations that go nowhere. Because I think that's where a lot of people spend a lot of time spinning their wheels. They're frustrated. It's not fun. They're not seen as a thought leader. They're not, in some ways respected, because they're seen as a, lower level, quote unquote salesperson. But when you introduce this one tool into the process, you can completely flip that around. So you're spending your time with people that are genuinely interested, high quality prospects that are more than likely going to say yes. And it's just maybe a timing issue. It's a logistical issue. Okay, when can we start? And do you have payments, or whatever those things might be. So that's what I want for everybody, because that's what I experienced through this process.
And some of these numbers are very encouraging, and it relates back to what you were saying earlier about how you can't change someone's mind. And so what that says to me is that we need to do better at finding those new leads and at sorting them out. Sort of like when you were explaining that, in my head, I was thinking like three or four different paths, right? Someone finds you and you say, and you have the conversation, and then you say, well, have you read my book? If the answer to that is yes, then it's pretty easy to get to finding the right fit, figuring out that sale. If the answer is I haven't read your book, then well, can I send you my book? And then that might even save the sale in the end, right? Because if you didn't have that book tool there, then you might kind of have a conversation that goes nowhere, or you end up saying, oh, we'll revisit, and they never do. But at least with the book, you have sort of this follow-up. And then even you say, well, worst case, so to speak, scenario is, no, they haven't read your book. No, they don't want to read your book. And that's totally fine. Now no one's wasted their time living in maybe land and like maybe ending up in sort of a transaction. So it's kind of like back in high school when you thought, oh man, like maybe me and this person can be friends, and you can't force it. If you don't get along, if you don't like each other, then don't be friends. And if you're not satisfied with your circle of friends, maybe it's time to go and find new friends and be a little bit uncomfortable temporarily and take that risk, but kind of put your best foot forward and have this book, have this kind of follow-up prospecting tool. That way you and this future buyer of yours who don't know about each other, who need each other, can then kind of be connected through your book, through theshortbookformula.com. And so is there anything else people need to know going in? Is it just go to theshortbookformula.com and find out what's there? Or do you have any final parting words of advice for us here, Paul?
Yeah. So, best place is theshortbookformula.com. There you'll see a variety of ways to engage with me, including getting a complimentary copy of my book. I also just want to reiterate that, I really believe in the both and strategy and the synergy, especially when it comes to authority marketing. In other words, a book by itself is fantastic. And there's, we talked about a lot of the ways that you can leverage that. Likewise, I think having a podcast is fantastic, and for reasons I'm sure you talked about, there's lots of reasons that you can there's lots of different ways that you can leverage it. But the magic really happens when you take, I would call it speaking or a podcast with a book, and you put them together. That's really where you start getting results that are 1 + 1 = 3. When you synergistically do these things together, you really take your results to the next level. And so for anyone that say has a book, I would say, hey, my first question to them is, do you have a podcast, or are you guesting on podcasts? That's like the logical next step. But conversely, I would say that if you have a podcast or you're guesting on podcast, that it's like, hey, now you need to go get a book so that you can create that 1 + 1 = 3 dynamic.
I love it. So don't just assume that the book on its own is a magic bullet. Make it as part of your whole other system. And I love getting books when I have podcast guests and they send things in the mail. I love that sort of thing. And many times I'm thinking like, oh yeah, I remember this person. Or even when they get the timing right, when they schedule with me as the podcast host, and then a few days later, their book arrives in the mail, and then they appear on camera. I feel like I already know the person. It kind of has that same effect you're talking about, like the pre-qualified, but it's pre-qualifying me as a podcast host. So there's, so many possibilities about having a book, but the person or people watching this podcast need to have a book first in order to appreciate many of these advantages. So the very next step, before you even get up to go to the bathroom after this podcast episode, go to theshortbookformula.com. Do it now, so that way it's no longer just a dream or a shoulda, woulda, coulda. This is a thing that you are taking action on now. That way you can have the sequence, the funnel, the system that that you wanted in a business that runs itself, where you have predictable results, where you're actually getting people to come to you consistently instead of relying on luck, because luck might be fine for a while, but then you might run out of luck. So that the way to make your own luck is to go to theshortbookformula.com, and we'll see you there. And thank you, Paul, for just satisfying us with so many stories. We went about double the time, but that's good because we fit in so much. So I appreciate you very much for showing up and spreading this very powerful message. Theshortbookformula.com. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.